there always is a new devil, because otherwise we have to point the fingers in towards ourselves and say, oh, it's my fault that we killed off the farmers and now we're starving, and then we killed off the one guy who actually had some truth about it, so now we're going to start looking for elsewhere. So maybe it was the police who didn't arrest him fast enough, or maybe it really was the Jews. I mean, we always blame them anyway. Maybe it was the rich because they set us so far back that now we have to come way farther from behind. But really, what I think the real danger here are the dissidents, the people who don't agree with what I'm saying right now, because you're standing in the way of our progress. So now, anybody who doesn't agree with me? I don't know. A couple of you look like you don't agree with me, so we're going to round you up anyway, and we're going to throw you in prisons now. So in other words, you start whittling away at some point, and you're killing all of the devils. Sometimes the devils, of course, are the devils that we have to create. Sometimes they're real, and then sometimes they're the ones that we have to create. Because if we just kind of accept things as they are, then that almost sounds like we have to accept our lots in life. Yeah.
In other words, the mass movements always look for something to become someone, and because it's usually not something people see as something good and wonderful and like a miracle, they don't want to blame God for it, so they blame the devil, which is destruction, evil, and robbery.
Yeah. We can put an asterisk here next to a God, and normally I write in all capitals up here, but I wanted to recreate what he has there for a reason, because he does say, without belief in a God, but never without belief in a devil, and of course, a devil, he has a lowercase. So here he's talking about a proper noun. Here he's talking about, like a general category. So yeah, a devil would be anybody who blames it, because, like, for example, when you guys do something bad, you lie, cheat, steal, murder, the usual weekend stuff. Yeah. Why do you do it?
Bored.
No, you're not bored.
Yes, sir.
No.
You see what would happen?
Temptation. No. Right?
See what would happen?
It sounds like you guys are taking personal responsibility. This is America. We don't take personal responsibility around here. You do it because the devil made you do it. It wasn't me. It's the temptation of the devil. I would never normally do it. The devil is kind of like this catch-all scapegoat for the person who tempts us to do this stuff that, again, clutching our pearls. I would never do something like that. I'm always careful of people who say that. I would never, and fill in the blank, because they're probably the ones who do it the most. So when they say, like, the devil in this case is the police, the Jews, the rich, the whoever it is, you fill in the blanks of it. And so, yeah, exactly. It causes a scapegoat, because if we can find a person, well, first off, notice he's talking here specifically about mass movements. If I come to one person and tell a person, the Jews are really running things. The Jews are really doing this. It's hard for us to sit there and go, yeah, because you're one-on-one with a person. Typically, we'll hear that and we'll say, I don't know, man, that doesn't sound so right. But if I get like 100 people in a room and I'm yelling and I'm talking about how terrible the Jews are, and you've got a couple of people who are well placed in that crowd to cheer at the right times and to give the fist up at the right times, you can encourage the whole mass of people to do this. Eric Hoffer wrote a book called The True Believer. It's a great book, and I know it's a great book because I've owned it like 6 or 7 times. Every time I buy it, I lend it to someone, and I've never gotten it back. So that tells me it must be a very good book because people keep it. Or else they hate it so much that they set it on fire. But in the book, he's talking specifically about how it is that a few true believers of something can motivate a mass of people to fall in behind a cause. And he makes some really interesting observations. So, for example, one of them is that it doesn't matter in a society if it's a leftist cause, if it's a conservative cause, if it's something in the middle, that people who follow mass movements follow them regardless of philosophy or where they are. If you have a few, like, why did the Nazis become Nazis? Just because Nazism was the loudest and got there first. Why wasn't it like radical? Why wasn't it like like radical democracy? Because they weren't there. That's all it was. In other words, the people are almost always primed to join a mass group because we're social creatures, and so we want to belong to something that's bigger than us and something that's popular, something that everybody else is involved in. And so with the mass movement, we join it, and then you have a few people who really believe in it who get the rest of us to go. So if you can get a crowd of 100 people and start blaming the Jews, and just a few people to cheer at just the right times, you can now influence a whole mass of people to join with that. Yeah.
So what you're saying essentially is that people can join a cause without actually believing in it or actually having any care in it just because they want to be in it?
Yeah.
For the sake of just being in it?
To be joined with people. To be joined with a crowd of people. Yeah, and you can see this happening on social media now. And I hate to bring it up because I know people are always harping on social media, but I just mean it in the sense of, like, think about how often you might reshare something, or you might see people reshare things that you're kind of lukewarm about. Either you're not sure about it, or you're just kind of like, yeah, I guess that sounds good. You know, and then you see other people sharing it, then lots of us are sharing it, like we're changing our profile pictures and, things like that just because, well, everybody else is doing it. We don't really know much about it, but heck, at least when I do this, now I've joined together with a bunch of other people. Yeah.
Can this be also tied to like cults and religions too, or this political stuff?
Yeah, he doesn't do a lot about religions in his book, but he does mention them in one section. It's very similar, especially when that's something that's, like you look at the Crusades. A lot of people joined the Crusades because they believed in it, true, but then it was also just like the thing to do. Lots of people were doing it, so you kind of go along with it. And it isn't just that people are just like, well, I'm a follower, so I'm going to follow along. People don't typically think that way. People will start to convince themselves they do believe in certain things. That way they can follow along, because nobody wants to think of themselves as a follower. But we do like to think of ourselves as part of the popular crowd. And I don't just mean that like in a social sense of like, ooh, I'm one of the popular kids. I mean it like this is something that I want to be on the right side of history. That's something you hear a lot today. People will say, I'm going to be on the right side of history. And maybe not. I don't know what the right side is, because the right side isn't necessarily the winning side. We've seen time and again throughout history where the right side is not the one that won. Eventually it probably wins out, but maybe that wasn't the day for it to happen. So yeah, so a mass movement, he's talking here that you can get a mass of people to do things that individuals would never do on their own. Maybe in a small session, I can just say, take a look at the comments section on a YouTube video. People who are part of a mass group are doing things there they would never do if they were by themselves in real life. And so he says that the mass movements can, not that they do, but they can rise and spread without belief in a God. So it isn't necessarily just religious movements that happen. We tend to think of this as religions and cults and all that, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. He says, but it can never happen without this. So you can do it with this, but you can't do it without that. So, for example, you could look at the Crusades as an example of this. In their minds, it was like we're supporting God, and then we're also having to fight against the devil, who were the Islamists who had taken over Jerusalem. So in their minds, they had both of these two things going on. But the really dangerous ones are the ones that don't have any of this going on. I don't just mean this, as we said, in a religious sense. If we think about like a devil and a God, well, I mean, what kind of things do we associate with God? Yeah.
Bliss.
What's that?
Bliss.
Bliss, okay. So we have bliss. This was something I wanted to talk about last time, but I forgot to offer it. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Okay. I guess I'll ask this. What kind of things do we associate with the devil, with evil?
Destruction.
Weed. Did you say weed?
Someone said.
What else do we associate? I don't know, man. I'm not sure. Your devil's pretty relaxed.
Oh, yeah.
What else do we associate with?
The absence of goodness.
Well, you know that's where I'm going when we talked about it. If I'm asking for examples, yeah. What's that? Death.
Sins.
Like what? One or two.
Killing people.
Kid murder, okay.
Murder. Suicide.
Dust.
Suicide. All right. So when we're trying to figure out what these things are over here, evil, I think what you're going to find that essentially we think of the things that are evil and negative as being the absence of the things over here. So for example, when you walk into a room and it's completely black, all pitched out, what's missing from that room? Why can't you see? Light. So you could say, yeah, the room is dark, but the room is only dark because there's no light in it. So Darkness is just the absence of light. You can think of evil as the same thing. Evil is just the absence of good. Anything that we think of over here, like for example, death is the absence of life. If you have death, then you don't have life. Murder is the absence of, say, respect for another individual's life. It isn't a disrespect for it, it's a lack of respect for someone's life. So you can think of evil as always being that. It's the absence of the good thing. Lying is just the absence of truth. You're presenting something, but you're presenting it completely absent of truth. And so forth. So you can go down the list and you can start to find the parallels that are there. It's almost like it's a distortion of the natural order in which things should be. I guess that might be a more complex or simpler way of thinking about it, but hopefully it'll help. So now when we're looking at the devil, the problem becomes this. When we no longer have that list of things that give us an absence of, and we're only left with this. So now this becomes the primary motivator. So what's wrong with the other side? Well, there are all of these things. What are we? Don't know. Don't know what we stand for. But one thing I do know, we have to stand against all of this. We have to stand against all of these folks. And you find people who define themselves largely based off of what they're against, not what they're in favor of. Like you go talk to protesters and you ask them what they're protesting and you ask them what do you believe, you'll find largely that they're going to explain what they believe in terms of what they're against. Not what they're in favor of, but what they're against. So now I guess the problem becomes, so you're a person who defines yourself as somebody who has to be fighting against something. Yeah. Well, what happens when there's nothing left to fight against? Well, then you got to go find something else to fight against. And you find yourself in this life that's perpetually not trying to rectify or fix anything in life, so much as to fight against something in life, which means you always have to have something to fight against. You've always got to create new villains. You always have to create new devils, or imagine them. And if you remember going back to our first week together, what's in your closet? It's the monsters of your imagination. There are no monsters in your closet. The only thing that's in your closet is whatever you project into it, those monsters that are inside of us. Eventually, once the devils that maybe are responsible for your lot in life, well, first off, you're responsible for your lot in life, but the devils who contribute to it for sure, once they're gone, well, now what's left? Well, all that we can imagine. There must be some other group, some other group, some other group, some other group. And so we have to be careful when we define ourselves as negatives. Is there a mass movement that you can think of that doesn't really define itself by the devils that it's fighting against? You can't answer that because I talked about it in my first video. There is one, and there's one that you all know, by the way. I'm not even sure if I'm asking it properly.
Homelessness?
Homelessness?
Wait.
I don't know if that would be a mass movement, though.
Oh.
We have all decided we will have no homes.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. There's one that, and I know that you all know it, yes.
Christianity?
No, even then. It sounds terrible if I say it this way, but many of you are here because of this.
Oh, poverty.
No.
You should not.
Kind of. What's that? I mentioned him earlier.
What's the question?
I don't remember. I was asking if there's a mass movement that we can think of that's characterized mostly by the positive rather than the thing it's fighting against. And I'm going to suggest, the reason it's a hard question for me to ask is because I imagine that many of us, even if I tell you what it is, will still think, no, but they were fighting against something. Not so much as they were fighting in favor of something. Yeah.
Civil rights movement?
Yeah, civil rights movement.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I was saying is something that we all know, but I didn't know how to ask the question exactly. The civil rights movement, which did fight poverty, right? And I mention that because you look at Martin Luther King Jr. He didn't necessarily come along and say, all right, there's a bunch of devils out there and we have to fight them. Remember, that wasn't his thing at all. It wasn't fighting against anything. His push was to stand for something. And it wasn't to go out and attack. It was to stand and defend, really. He came along and he was holding up the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And he was like, these things right here, these documents, yeah, we should do that. What do you mean? Well, see here where it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These are truths that we hold to be so obvious that nobody has to defend them. They're just so obvious. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Can we do the next part? That all men are created equal and are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So just by virtue of the fact that you're a human being and you've been born, you're endowed with certain rights by your Creator. Not by humans, but by the Creator. And if that's the case, then it's God-given, therefore it can't be taken away from you, among which, not all of them, but among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you see here where it says, like, all people, all of mankind, yeah, we're mankind also. We're humans also. So we're just saying, just do what you said already. They weren't going out there and trying to find something to fight against. They were standing in favor of something. But these are pretty rare, that you find that a mass movement of people who just stand for something rather than fight against something else. And I get that people will say, well, no, but they were fighting against racists. No, not really. They weren't going out looking for them. They were just going to go eat lunch. They were just getting on a bus. They were just exercising their rights as they were. They weren't going out there and fighting against these things. They were standing for what they already were. But again, these are pretty rare. These are pretty rare circumstances. So, mass movements can rise and spread without a belief in a God. It does happen, and sometimes it happens with it. And in that case, by the way, it was a literal God and a metaphorical God. God in the sense of being a positive movement, but also literal in the sense, I mean, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King, who had a doctorate in divinity, so he was a reverend. He believed that this stuff was true because he believed that part about the Creator endowing us with these things. So quite literally he meant that. But then also, however, he says, but never without belief in a devil. So he would even argue that in that case here, that there was still a devil that they were fighting against. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?
Could we get exams? Please?
Okay. Go ahead and put those away, unless I owe you a stamp.